Hello, hello. All right. First time ever on Third Act Thursday. Usually doing this one solo. And I am joined by, of course, my usual co-host, Megan. How are you?
Good, thanks. The pressure is on.
Right. No pressure. No pressure. Okay. We start recording now. Okay. So what we're going to do on this third act is we usually do variations of my origin story and where I'm going with my current third act, rebirth, if you will. So we're going to roll back the clocks. We did a episode a while back now. I want to say end of January. We did our origin stories, myself and Megan. So you can look at that at it's just on YouTube for now. I haven't got the podcast up of it, but it's on there. So it's on our YouTube channel. But in the meantime, we're going to just do a condensed version. So maybe there is a bit of pressure, time sensitive.
All right.
So yeah, but you're well into you're essentially your third act. You're well past it, and you're on the other side of that. But let's roll back the clock a little bit, and what led you up to this point that we are currently at, please.
So what led me to sort of like how I live my life now, how I function now, all came to a head in 2019 after I gave birth to my twin girls. And shortly after that, I had postpartum depression and more severely postpartum anxiety. And I fought against that really hard for a year. I fought against the label of it. I fought against just feeling out of control and not knowing how to find my way back. And so I kind of just ignored it for the year and hoped that it would get better. But when we approached their first birthday was when I really was like, okay, something's got to give. I have to learn to bend a little bit and just kind of succumb to this so that I can start moving forward and feeling better.
So it took a full year. So that year, I can only imagine must have been very. So it's like you have this idea that eventually it's just going to fade. Where in fact was. Yeah. And was it quite the opposite? Like, did it gain? Did it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it did. Okay.
Oh, yeah. It gained a lot of momentum for sure. I hoped that it would just get better with time, partly because a lot of like medical professionals told me like, it'll just get better with time. And I got dismissed a lot. And I didn't want to feel out of control. I wanted to feel like I could just get it together on my own. And the idea of having to change the way I had been functioning for 30 plus years seemed almost scarier than just admitting that I needed to get some help.
So what was the most challenging part for you as far as admitting, getting help, admitting that it's not something that is just within your, because I'm imagining the old Megan would have been very much like, no, I got this. I can handle this.
Totally. Yeah.
So there's that side of it. And yeah, in the meantime, you're kind of being dismissed at the same time too, which is not validating, helping, right? It's not helping your validation of it's creating more confusion almost over what's going on. So what was the most challenging part? I would imagine it would be like dealing with the inner dialogue of yourself.
Yeah, totally. Like I had a lot of shame and guilt attached to it and feeling like I wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough. Why couldn't I just get it together? What was wrong with me that I couldn't get myself out of this? And so I had to reframe that for myself, really, when I started going to counseling and talking about my experience, to know that what I had just experienced was a trauma. And so my brain was reacting appropriately to a trauma because my girls came via emergency C-section. So I wasn't planning on that.
Right.
So my brain was doing its best to kind of cope with that. And so just kind of knowing that removed some of the feelings of shame for me and led me into recreating, how I wanted to parent, the really unrealistic expectations I had put upon myself as to how I thought I should be parenting, kind of pouring into everybody else and not pouring into myself at all, and just recreating the life that I wanted for myself. And so I am a completely different person now.
So yeah, and that's a perfect time to ask. So what's the biggest thing that you learned from this? So you came out the other side. I imagine it has something to do with like the flexibility thing, like you say, release of expectations, or what would you say are like the top three things that you've
Yeah.
Or learned coming out of this, coming out the other side?
Well, I definitely learned that I had to put myself first, and that
Mm,
putting myself first did not mean that I don't love my kids, and just how important that was. Another thing that I learned was just how to like get to know my body again. 'Cause I felt so out of body during that experience.
okay. Yeah.
Know how to listen to those signals when I wasn't doing well. And then I just learned to let go of that outside voice or that outside kind of societal judgment as to what determined if I was a good mom or not, meaning like what I fed them and what they wore and if they were reaching all their milestones and all that kind of stuff. I redefined what it meant for me, for my kids to be healthy and thriving.
Right. So a lot of like reframing, but also a lot of like relearning. Sounds like you're having
Oh,
to
yeah,
relearn
totally.
about you're listening to your own body, relearning how to put yourself first, right? And you always hear about like, and I can only imagine like motherly guilt, right? So there's probably it's almost like a tale of two stories, because at one sense you feel 100% that you have to be, it's the girls first, right? But then, as we always talk about, you're not going to bring 100% of yourself if you can't take care of yourself first, right? So there's got to be this strange dynamic that you can read all the books in the world, but until you actually are exposed to it, right? I can only imagine that was the case.
Yeah, I had to look at how not taking care of myself was not creating the dynamic and the relationship with my daughters that I had hoped for, because I wasn't present. I was anxious and constantly projecting into the future or constantly living in the past and not having time to make sure I was okay before I entered into those things to make sure they were okay. Like something as simple as feeding them or bath time. I wasn't okay in that moment to do those things, not in a rush or not in a state of emergency or without getting frustrated. So I had to learn a little bit the hard way and reflect back on the way I was currently functioning to see that it was not working for me.
How much do you think of the hard lessons are the best lessons? And what I mean by that is like, do you think you ever would have, gotten to some of these stages had you not been really,
I
your
don't
hand
know.
had been forced? Or was there a sense that like, okay, this is how life shows, because I know myself and I can be fairly whatever, fill in the blank, stubborn. So this was the way that life is going. No, you do have to change this way. Like, how much of that do you view as being the case, if
Yeah,
any?
I mean, I definitely think I have the same personality trait. It's like I have to learn the hard way. And I really felt like I had to intentionally break before I could rebuild myself in like the best version of me, because I like myself so much better now because I have boundaries and I do take care of myself and I am able to relax in the midst of chaos. I don't need to clean everything before I can finally sit down. I can just sit
Mm,
down and be okay and fill my cup without that feeling of guilt. And so this stage of my life, even though it only happened like 2.5 years ago, is really like a complete rebirth of who I was.
awesome. That's great. You know what? That's a great spot to end off, because you use the rebirth, which is part of the title there. So
Yeah.
awesome story. I'd love to continue with this. Maybe we'll do a part two and kind of do some follow up. There's more to your story too. I mean, I'd like to go back to your leaving Save on Foods, right? You were kind of like the
Yeah.
OG for doing that in a sense. Yeah. And just, getting into the career that you're currently 8 years
Yeah.
deep, right? So that's definitely there's some stories in there. So let's continue the little mini series of Third Act Thursday with Megan,
Yeah.
if you care
Totally.
to do so.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Yeah, a great week of shows here, and a fantastic event that we had last week as well with our first one. So yeah, it's got some super cool stuff going on. So yeah, thanks for your time again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You betcha. Excellent. Thanks, Megan. I got to get
Yeah.
on my strong coach call here. So